On the balcony, in full view of the vast throng that surges forward with a full-throated welcome that is deafening.
Sharing these great events with Houde was the Quebec historian Robert Rumilly.
When she went back to England, she said that Camillien was the man who most impressed her in Canada. And Camillien was that was repeated to him, of course, and he was very proud of it, because he was very far from being anti-British, and he was even a royalist. He was a royalist, and I remember he used to tell me, the Royal Mail, His Majesty's Service, that has another style than just United States Mail. See?
I used to come over quite often to the hotel there. He'd call me whenever mayors turned up, and if I wanted to phone on a private line, I'd go into his bedroom. And one day, in the bedroom, there was a picture of Mussolini and a medal which the Mussolini had sent him through the consul, framed. I was amused. About 2 or 3 weeks later, I went into that bedroom to use the phone again. There was no Mussolini picture, but at his bedside, the little table on which the telephone was, there was Karl Marx Das Kapital. So when I went back into the sitting room, I said, "You've certainly changed your politics, Mr. Mayor." So what do you mean? I said, "Where's Mussolini?" "Oh," he said, "he's no good." I said, "But you've got Karl Marx." He says, "That's where the people of Quebec are going now, and I want to know all about it."
Did he switch back?
Well, of course, he didn't have much in the way of political principles. He wanted to lead the crowd, and he thought the best way to lead the crowd was to follow them and what he thought their political views or tendencies were.
Irrevocabile. But Mussolini remained a special favorite, and this fact did not endear Houde to English Canada. His stand, however, was not that bizarre in the Quebec of 1939. It has been estimated that 90% of the large Italian community was pro-fascist, and the church in Quebec did nothing to discourage this. Socialism and communism were considered far greater evils. When the Second World War began that fall, Quebec was decidedly lukewarm about involvement in another European war. Propaganda movies to encourage recruitment were more subtle than the posters of the First War that generally featured the British bulldog snarling at his French subjects. But the memories of the bloody conscription crisis of 1917 were still vivid. Mackenzie King had promised that only volunteers would serve outside of Canadian territory. But when he introduced national registration and brought in movie cameras to prove that he and his cabinet had willingly registered, French Canada was not impressed. They saw this as the first step towards eventual conscription. In August 1940, Mayor Houde issued a statement announcing that he would refuse to obey the law and register. Tracy Luddington of the Montreal Gazette is felt to be the man who sent Houde to jail.
But it wasn't anything deliberate. Campbell Carroll was covering City Hall for the Gazette at the time, and I was city editor. And he called me on the phone and he said, "The mayor has just advised people not to sign up for the war. What do I do?" Well, I said, "Do you remember exactly what he said?" He said, "Yes." Well, I said, "Type it out and take it in and ask him to sign it." Oh, he said he won't sign it? I said, "He will. I know the man, and if it's what he said, he'll sign it." So Campbell went in, he signed it, Campbell brought it back to the office. I wrote a story, and it was on the front page of the Gazette in the early edition. The censor, Eddie McMahon, called me up and he said, you're going to have to take that story out of the paper. Now, the country was at war and the censor was the boss. So I took it out. Now, Hanson was the leader of the Conservatives at the time. I called him in Ottawa and he gave me his secretary's home phone number and I called her and I read the story to her over the phone. Hanson went into the House of Commons and read it into the record before the Liberals were smart enough to stop him. This made it public record.
Mackenzie King and his Quebec Lieutenant Ernest Lapointe decided Houde would have to go. King made the following notation in his diary of August 3rd.
At 1 o'clock, I brought up the matter in the cabinet. All present were virtually agreed that action be taken against Houde, and that immediately. Council then discussed whether Houde should be interned or dealt with by the courts. It was agreed that, if brought before court, he would be given the opportunity he wanted, namely, speechify, making a display, etc. It was felt that if he were interned at once, that would deprive him of this opportunity and would be most helpful in the end. It was agreed that the mounted police should take this action forthwith. It was thought it had better be taken at night, as there would be no opportunity for photograph displays, etc. I can see in this whole business possibility of riots and serious difficulties throughout the province of Quebec. However, I see no other course. The federal government cannot afford to have its laws defied by one of Mayor Houde's prominence.
Montrealers read that their mayor had been arrested at 11 o'clock the night before while on the steps of City Hall. But Mackenzie King had nothing to fear. There was little outcry. Now, when he was interned during that period, Houde had been a favorite target of the entertainer Gracien Gélinas. Did you at that time continue to do anything on Houde?
No, because it would have been, the audience would not have found it funny. He was there, you see, and I think that the audience felt, the public felt a little ashamed of their lack of reactions when he was interned. I'm quite sure that Camillien Houde himself thought that there would be an uproar, you see, if they would try to put him away, and nothing happened.
The mayor was a forgotten man. He was taken first to Petawawa internment camp and then to Fredericton. At Petawawa, the leader of the prisoners was Mario Latoni.
I was the first one to know of any new arrivals, and I was told that, lo and behold, the mayor of Montreal had arrived to become part of the family at the Petawawa internment camp. Unfortunately, it could not be received within the compound the same day that he arrived, or shortly after, because we could not find a large enough uniform to fit him.
He was permitted only one postcard a month, and that was censored. His family was not allowed to see him for a year and a half, and then only once a month for 20 minutes. Another visitor was his secretary, Lucien Hétu.
Because when I went to Petawawa, I really had a shock. I had known Houde in his role of mayor of Montreal, and you come to him in that prisoner's uniform with a large red circle in the back, as he said, in case I run too fast, with his 300 pounds.
Although he was 51 years of age, he joined in with the work gangs. One winter, he cut so much wood, the authorities finally had to order him to stop. He refereed hockey games and gave out no penalties, saying the players involved were in enough trouble already.
And he was a greater and a bigger Canadian than this guy to my left here, right here. And that's why today you will see behind my home the Camillien Houde Memorial Ring. Camillien Houde. I could picture Camillien up in Potawatomi saying, Jimmy and Joe, this is the way you do it. If we could be with our Montrealers tonight, if we were free to do things we might, then I could see him do a little soft shoe on the shoes. I want to go back to that tumble down shack in Montreal. I want to see all the gang that I used to know.
Now, he didn't hold this against me. He was in for 4 years, and every one of those years on my birthday, he sent me a birthday present. And every one of those 4 years on Christmas, he sent me a Christmas present. Because he knew something I didn't know. He realized that I had made him a martyr in his own lifetime.
In August 1944, with the defeat of fascism inevitable, Houde was placed on the Ocean Limited and given a ticket to Montreal. When they had taken him away 4 years earlier, the city had been silent, and Houde had every reason to believe that he had lost his audience.
You can organize 500 people to meet somewhere there, but you cannot do with thousands and thousands of people. It was partly organized, but it was a very sincere reaction of the mass. They loved him, and they wanted to see him. They felt lonesome about him, and he felt lonesome about them too.
The people were crying and calling at him, and everybody was so glad you could see that, you know, your heart was jumping to hear something like that.
Of course, the scene was...
Another witness was the writer, David Leggett.
And it wasn't entirely French-Canadian by any means, because the man was, I think the word is loved. They knew he was a mischievous individual, but they loved the man.
The man was getting up in years. He was about 55 at the time. He had no position, no job, no business, no profession. There was only one thing he could do, and that was public life.
Within months, Houde was re-elected mayor, and from then to the end of his political career, no man could beat him, and few dared to try. He had taught himself English by reading newspapers, and he knew it so well that he could now deliberately misuse it to enrich his legend. When he was asked to build public urinals, he said he would not only build urinals, he would build arsenals. Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, the head of the Dutch resistance, may have disapproved of Houde's war effort, but he quickly succumbed to the warmth of the man. A warmth which penetrated even unto the English mansions of Westmount.
But my first really contact with His Worship came at St. Andrew's Ball, because, you know, he'd been in an internment camp, and a lot of the old Scotchmen were a little against his appearing, and I fought very much for him. So did my husband. And he came to the ball, and he was great. He was absolutely wonderful.
Was there any tension at that first St. Andrew's Ball after the war?
I don't think so. Everybody was too busy getting a little high.
Houde was also quick to forgive. The Liberal cabinet had kept him in prison for 4 years. And yet, when a Liberal cabinet minister like Paul Martin came to call, Houde was a gracious host.
He had the most amazing, ugly, kind-looking face. He had a great sense of humor. He said to the present queen when she was princess, they were driving through the streets of Montreal on Sherbrooke Street, presumably, in an open automobile. People on both sides of the street were crowded, were 4 and 5 feet deep, cheering like hell. And he turned to the princess and he said, "Your Royal Highness, some of that's for you."
Houde was not a beloved figure in the rest of Canada. Toronto Star cameramen were ordered to photograph him in the most unflattering manner possible. This, of course, delighted Houde, who said that the more outlandish he looked, the more his people would love him. Many of his female constituents seemed to feel that Camille was so ugly, he was beautiful.
He liked the women. Oh, he really loved the women. He couldn't get away from that. And I seen him with some very nice women, some other women who weren't too good looking, but he didn't care. As long as he was in their company, he was happy.
The one man who had had the last laugh on Houde was the Iron Man of Quebec, Maurice Duplessis. In 1933, Duplessis had driven him from the larger provincial stage, and Houde had never forgotten. But now it was 1949, and the two leaders of French Canada were brought together on neutral territory and left alone in a hotel room. They emerged 3 hours later, swapping traveling salesman jokes, and Duplessis had agreed to support Houde in a run for a seat in the Canadian House of Commons. Houde won the election and went to Ottawa. They built a special seat large enough to hold the new member from Montreal. He was sworn in on a hot August day, but he told friends later that he felt as if the chamber was made of ice.
I saw him in Parliament, but I think I only saw him there once or twice. He never spoke, and he only came for two, three times, and he never returned. What happened, I don't know. I think he just lost interest. I think he realized that it was likely a forum not suited to his interests or skills.
He went home to stay. Post-war Montreal was tailor-made for Camillien Houde.
What made the 40s so spectacular?
Oh, I think there was a real feeling that there was no tomorrow, you know. There was no feeling of, there was a lot of money around and people were spending it. It came easy and they spent it easy. There was a lot of war profiteering there, and also there was a lot of money from guys in the army, young
Ken Johnson, journalist and man about town, covered the nightclubs for the old Montreal Standard.
And of course the gamblers, they say they were spending their money in the clubs. And certainly was a wild kind of city.
Windsor Steakhouse and the Penthouse, 28 years in all, 28 years. But I think for the first 2-3 years I didn't have a permit, but I was selling booze anyway.
Harry Labe ran a club so popular that entertainers like Dean Martin would come in after hours and work for nothing.
Selling without a license? Well, you take a chance. We used to get pinched, and we used to all go down. There used to be a thrill to go down the patrol. Everybody used to make the reservations in the patrol then. They wanted the front seat. There was a lineup of cops as you walked down the staircase up, and they walked you into the paddy wagon, and then we'd take a deck of cards with us, and like Harry Irish start playing for money down in the cells, and they'd gamble, and when they'd say, okay, you're all out, he says, no, we're not finishing anyway. They wouldn't believe
Did you have to pick up?
Oh, yeah, we had to bail them out. It was like $50, and then you'd get one of the cops with one finger. You sit there 4 hours while he was typing with one finger.
But the police were generally friendly and helpful. The downtown area, where the Barbot gambling palaces abounded, was the province of Detective Sergeant Fred Savage.
In number 10 district, we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We had about a dozen Barbots. And they were all wide open. We had our gambling. We had our houses for these ladies. We had hockey tickets and betting and everything. And everybody was so happy. And everybody lived like a human being should live.
Let's say that the city was lively and opened. Like if you were arrested at 3 a.m. after you spent part of your paycheck and all the money went back to the governments in taxes, you were put in jail until you sobered. Let them out and let them go home and let the wife pronounce sentence, you see?
From time to time, the police came out in force to reassure the citizens that everything was in good working order.
When they were going to raid certain places, the police told them they were coming. So they'd leave new customers in the place, and all their very good customers, they'd get them out fast. So when the police got there, they got about 4 or 5 prisoners. But the raid was made, which they had to do to make a showing.
The bartenders, the club owners, the politicians still remember the good old days. George Gould was an attorney for the city.
You can't raid the golf clubs where the biggest gambling going on in this whole country was going on there. The private clubs, such as the Mount Royal Club in the corner of Stanley and Sherbrooke, beautiful big club opposite Sir William Manhorn's house. How could you raid that legally and get a conviction? There's more gambling going on than what these gentlemen are talking about.
But the city's attitude then was one of tolerance?
Tolerance. There's no way. The province would not allow us to change the law to allow it, which is the case now.
And this is what I've learned from the late Camillien Houde. You've got to be honest with people, Frank. If they're taking bets, it's not murder, it's not assassination. It's not criminal, it's against a minor bylaw.
And another thing, these girls, who we call prostitutes, they were allowed to roam free. Well, we never had any rapes with these women roaming around, because a person might have family trouble, he might be a maniac or something, he goes downtown and he's got his satisfaction, and he doesn't bother anybody.
There were others in the city who did not entirely agree with Fred Savage. Even Houde's sidekick, Frank Hanley, sometimes had to draw the line.
In my heart, I couldn't go for legalized prostitution because of Catholicity. So I had to decide between common sense and Catholicity, and I decided on Catholicity. I'm not an atheist, and when I die, I want to be all dressed up and I want to have somewhere to go.
Everybody had somewhere to go. One of the arguments for keeping the gambling joints going was that they provided the criminal element with a place to spend their money. When a job was pulled, the police didn't have far to look.
40 to 60, little or no bank holdups. Rapes, breaking in and entries, little or none. Because the guy with a record had a job in a nightclub, in a tavern, as a doorman.